It was at a community gathering in Aurora, Colorado, that I first met James and Angela Craig a number of years ago. They were instantly noticeable. James was the type of guy who appeared to grab attention without trying, a confident grin, clean cut, the kind of voice that communicated power and warmth at the same time. In contrast, Angela had an air of gentle serenity that put you at rest just being around her. Together, they looked like a picture from a family magazine: 6 kids, a booming dental office, and a marriage that appeared unassailable from the outside. Whenever I saw them, I used to believe they had it all figured out. James would speak proudly about his children, and Angela would laugh, that lovely, beautiful giggle that made everyone around her smile too. They were engaged in church, helped at school activities, and lived in a home that projected stability. Everyone around them appreciated the life they established. If you had asked me then who the happiest couple in our community was, I would have responded, without hesitation, the Craigs. But occasionally, the individuals who appear the most flawless are harboring the deepest secrets. It took me years to understand that what I saw wasn't happiness, it was acting. James had erected a stage around himself, and we were all part of the audience. Behind that attractive smile and steady calm was a guy preoccupied with control, with image, with being regarded as immaculate. And Angela, ever the dutiful wife, fulfilled her part because that's what she felt love needed. Looking back, I can still see subtle clues that something wasn't right. The way Angela's grin would vanish the instant James turned his back. The way she occasionally paused before speaking, as if she was weighing her words carefully. I recall once, during a dinner, she remarked, feeling exhausted all the time. James waved it aside, claiming she worries too much. She laughed it away, but there was a spark of something in her eyes, something weighty. What struck me afterward was how convincing a facade can be when others want to believe it. No one questioned James because everything seemed fine. We didn't notice the fractures because we didn't want to. It's simpler to believe in happy families than to realize that occasionally, the darkest forms of evil lurk beneath polite grins and family photos. If there's one thing I learned from knowing them, it's that genuine danger doesn't necessarily come from strangers. It arrives silently, shrouded in affection, trust, and routine. We believe what we see, and we dismiss what we feel. That was the Craig's tale before the truth came out, and it's a lesson I'll never forget. It was subtle at first, the type of worry you can't quite describe but can't shake off either. I began noticing that the beautiful image of the Craigs didn't always match the atmosphere in the room when you were really with them. Angela's grin still showed when others were looking, but her eyes frequently spoke another tale. They had this worn, detached face, like someone living in 2 worlds, one public, one private. I recall one afternoon when I dropped by their dentist clinic for a short cleaning. James was behind the desk, chatting with the receptionist, charming as usual. But Angela strolled in a few minutes later with a pale face and shaking hands, bringing a tray of dental molds. She apologized for being late, even though she wasn't. James didn't say anything harsh, he didn't have to. The way he stared at her, the chilly flash of contempt beneath that grin, was enough to hush her entirely. I felt uneasy watching it, even though nothing technically improper had transpired. That's how control frequently seems in real life: quiet, undetectable, but stifling. When we chatted later, Angela shrugged everything aside. She claimed she was simply exhausted from managing the kids and the workplace, that James was under pressure. She said it like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. People in our community loved to brag about how solid their marriage was, how they functioned as a team. But I began wondering that what appeared like collaboration may have been something else entirely: Angela doing everything to maintain the peace, and James ensuring no one ever spotted the fractures. Sometimes, she'd remark on minor things that lingered with me afterward, like how James didn't like her hanging out with pals anymore, or how he insisted on managing all the bills himself because she worried too much about money. Back then, such statements didn't seem alarming, they sounded like idiosyncrasies. Now, they sound like warnings. The thing that disturbs me most is how natural everything appeared. That's what makes tales like theirs so scary. You anticipate toxic relationships to appear like yelling, commotion, or obvious bruises, but frequently, they appear serene. They appear useful. They appear beautiful from the outside. The signals reside in little moments: tension in a grin, hesitancy in a laugh, the way someone's individuality steadily vanishes until you can scarcely recognize them. I realized later that denial isn't just for the victims. It's for everyone around them too. We don't want to believe unpleasant things about individuals we know. We convince ourselves that there must be an explanation, that maybe we misunderstood. I told myself that too. But deep down, I believe Angela was already living in silent anxiety, trying to live in a life that appeared faultless but felt like a prison. Over time, it became evident that what James termed love was actually control veiled in care. It wasn't the loud, apparent kind, the one you see in movies when people shout or bang doors. His control was calmer, professional, and courteous, like everything else about him. He made every choice seem logical, every limit sound like protection. And Angela, seeking peace more than pride, learned to go along with it. I recall her once telling me that James didn't like her checking the mail anymore. He claimed it was because he didn't want her stressing about bills. Later, it was her phone he wanted access to it, only to make sure nothing important was missed. He framed every intrusion as caring, every limitation as love. It's terrifying how simple that type of manipulation is to ignore when it's dressed as affection. Angela's world started to shrink without anybody really noticing. She stopped attending us for weekend meals, stating James needed assistance at the clinic. When she did appear, she looked preoccupied, continuously checking the clock. He didn't ban her from seeing others. He simply made it so tough that she stopped trying. Control doesn't always appear like a closed door. It frequently looks like remorse, duty, and tiredness. What I didn't grasp back then was how profoundly isolation feeds control. The less Angela saw of other people, the more reliant she grew on James for acceptance, for comfort, for identity. She once told me that she felt blessed to have a spouse who kept her grounded. I thought that was wonderful. Now I know it was tragic. It was his language she was repeating, his explanation of her position in their universe. James had a knack for bending logic to his advantage. If Angela ever disagreed with him, he'd turn it into an emotional guilt trip, telling her she was being ungrateful or that she didn't appreciate everything he did for their family. She'd always end up apologizing, even when she was right. Witnessing them together was like witnessing a play when only one performer understood the script. The worst aspect is how regular it all seemed from the outside. He wasn't yelling, she wasn't weeping. There were no apparent scars, no screaming bouts. Just a steady erasing of who she used to be. And that's the scary thing about emotional control. It doesn't need to be loud to destroy you. It only requires time, consistency, and love that's conditional. When people speak of abuse, they frequently think of violence, not manipulation. But James showed me something I couldn't unsee. How someone can use compassion as a weapon. He didn't take away Angela's freedom overnight. He made her feel she didn't need it. And by the time she understood what was occurring, it was already too late. The affair was the moment everything split open. For years, James had constructed his reputation around devotion and moral courage. He was the loving spouse, the Christian family guy, the backbone of his society. But that version of James was simply a mask, and beyond it, something considerably colder was waiting. When I found out he was having an affair, I recall feeling astonished, but not wholly surprised. Somewhere deep down, the parts had never fit completely. Angela uncovered the affair before anybody else did. She discovered notes on his computer, emails, and images he believed he'd concealed carefully. The lady was someone linked to his dentistry network, someone who respected him, considered him brilliant. When Angela confronted him, James denied it at first, then blamed her. He stated she didn't make him feel seen, that he felt lonely in their marriage. It was textbook deflection, turning his treachery onto her fault. What devastated me most was hearing how Angela handled it. She didn't rage or throw him out. She grieved, prayed, and attempted to mend things. She told me once that she believed in forgiveness more than punishment. She wanted to rescue her family, not ruin it. She stated James had lost his way and needed her to help him find it again. That was who Angela was: steady, loyal to a fault, and optimistic even when she shouldn't have been. But forgiveness can't cure what's still hurting. After the encounter, James didn't appear remorseful. He looked encouraged. It was as if getting caught didn't humble him. It merely made him more vigilant. He vowed change, went to therapy once or twice, and played the role of a remorseful spouse. But behind the scenes, he was still corresponding with the same lady, concealing more texts, organizing excursions that Angela didn't know about. His words said, "I'm sorry," but his actions suggested, "I'll just do better at lying next time." Angela revealed to me that she couldn't escape the sensation that something was odd. Even after she had forgiven him, she wanted to trust him. But his eyes had altered. He'd grown more distant, less patient, even removed from his own family. Their house, once filled with laughter and commotion from the kids, began to seem silent, chilly. It wasn't only the betrayal, it was the emotional void that followed. Watching it all develop taught me something unpleasant but true. When someone hurts you badly, they also ruin the version of yourself you previously trusted. Angela attempted to reconstruct that version from memory. But you can't resuscitate something that never actually lived. James didn't want reconciliation, he wanted power back. And the affair, instead of being a turning point toward honesty, became the start of something considerably worse. Looking back, it was when the tale moved from sadness to peril. Infidelity wasn't the worst thing James would do to Angela. It was simply the rehearsal. Angela's sickness started so softly that at first, no one thought much of it. She'd always been healthy, fit, energetic, the type of parent who ran after school drop-offs and prepared smoothies every morning. So when she began complaining of headaches and nausea, we all believed it was stress. 6 kids, a company, a marriage under repair, it made logical. But something about it didn't feel right with me. She seemed more frail each time I saw her, like the life had been sucked out of her piece by piece. James, of course, portrayed the ideal spouse. He'd tell about how scared he was, how powerless he felt seeing her suffer. He'd prepare her protein drinks every morning, stating they'd help her recuperate quicker. I recall him once saying, with his placid grin, "I just want her to get her strength back." It seemed nice at the moment. None of us realized those shivers would become her death sentence. Angela informed me about the tremors herself. She stated James had been adding vitamins to increase her energy powders he got online. She trusted him totally. Why wouldn't she? He was her spouse, a dentist, someone she felt understood medicine and health better than others. But she continued growing ill. She'd wake up disoriented, her hands twitching, her eyesight blurry. Doctors did testing but discovered nothing convincing. The mystery grew, and James was always there, soothing her, holding her hand, assuring that she'd be okay. What terrifies me even today is how flawlessly he calibrated his act-carrying spouse in front, calculated poisoner in secret. I recall one Sunday, Angela couldn't make it to church because she was too weak to stand. James arrived alone with the kids, smiling sweetly, telling everyone she simply wanted rest. People appreciated him for his commitment. He was lauded for being such a supportive husband. Every comment was a reward for his role. Every grin from the congregation another layer of protection. When I visited Angela at home, she appeared weak, her skin pale, her emotions languid. She stated she didn't comprehend what was happening to her. She worried maybe she was having some bizarre autoimmune ailment. James had already begun muttering such possibilities, spreading them like seeds so no one would look too intently in another way. She stated he'd been studying her symptoms online, trying to help. It twists my stomach today, knowing those searches weren't for cures, they were for dosages. Looking back, I can see how premeditated it all was. He wanted her to trust him, to count on him totally. Every act of compassion was part of the strategy. That's what makes this tale so horrifying. He didn't murder her in fury or terror. He murdered her slowly, methodically, while persuading everyone, including her, that he was rescuing her. When she eventually went to the hospital, none of us believed she'd ever return home. But by then, the toxin had already done its damage. Angela's body was deteriorating, and James stood by her bed, seeming to be distraught, while the truth was silently pumping through her veins. After Angela's death, everything appeared to crumble in slow motion. At first, no one suspected foul play. The hospital had described her cause of death as uncertain, and James was heartbroken. He grieved at the funeral, hugged his children closely, and spoke about how much he'd loved his wife. It was impossible not to trust him. He was persuasive, controlled in precisely the right manner, emotional at the perfect times. But gradually, the little irregularities began to show. The first red signal came from the dentist's practice. A staff member noted a mysterious gift had been delivered soon before Angela became seriously sick. It was sent to James and identified as holding research materials. No one thought much of it until another shipment came, this one labeled with a chemical warning. When questioned, James shrugged it off, stating he was undertaking some lab-related studies for dental purposes. But something didn't sit right. Around the same time, a friend of Angela's said that she thought it weird how James was continually on his computer late at night. She believed he was working or searching for medical information regarding her illness. But when police eventually acquired access to his gadgets, they revealed something chilling, a digital trail of premeditation. James had been investigating cyanide poisoning, doses, and fatality timeframes. He'd searched up things like, is cyanide detectable in autopsy? And how long does it take to die from cyanide? His search history read like a confession typed in slow motion. He'd also been purchasing chemicals from obscure websites using aliases and lab reasons, leaving behind emails and payment records that traced everything straight to him. It's scary to consider how systematic he was. He didn't act out of fury. He planned like a scientist. He wanted Angela's death to seem natural, an inexplicable medical catastrophe. He even ordered arsenic as a backup in case the cyanide didn't work soon enough. His composure during her sickness finally made sense. He understood precisely what was occurring. The cops got engaged when a coworker alerted them to the odd chemical odors. Once they began investigating, the digital evidence piled up quickly. Investigators revealed that James had sought cyanide supplies soon after contacting his mistress. The contrast between those moments, romantic letters followed by how to make someone sick without detection, was almost too upsetting to fathom. When investigators approached him, James attempted to seem bewildered. He maintained the substances were for legal dental usage. But these weren't the sort used in dentistry. They were the kind that could kill. Forensic examination proved that Angela had fatal quantities of cyanide in her system, matching the substances James had purchased. The digital trail took away every layer of his duplicity. Technology, the exact thing he hoped would help him conceal, became the silent witness to his crime. That's the irony. No matter how sophisticated someone thinks they are, the truth leaves fingerprints. In this instance, they were only scrawled in keystrokes instead of blood. The day everything eventually crashed still plays in my memory like a scene I wish I could remake. Angela had been brought to the hospital again, and this time, the situation was worse. She was frail, scarcely able to talk, her skin pallid and chilly. I recall entering her room. It smelled vaguely of disinfectant and something metallic. Her breathing was short, her voice frail as she mumbled that she didn't understand why she wasn't getting better. I held her hand and promised her she would pull through, yet even then, I could see worry flashing in her eyes. James was there, of course, playing the part of a frantic spouse. He stood at her bedside, changing her blanket, speaking gently, even sobbing in front of the nurses. To anybody observing, he appeared like a man crushed by his wife's agony. He told the doctors he was afraid for her, that he'd do everything to assist. But every time he looked away, there was something chilly behind his expression, like someone seeing a plan develop precisely as intended. That night, Angela's health worsened significantly. The physicians scrambled, but nothing worked. Her pulse rate surged, then slowed, her organs shutting down one by one. James remained in the room till the very end, holding her hand as she drifted away. The sight disturbed everyone who watched this loving husband bidding farewell to his dying wife. What none of us realized at the time was that he wasn't grieving her death. He was seeing it happen by his own plan. The shock rocked the community like a hurricane. People who knew the Craigs couldn't believe it. There was no warning, no evidence of aggression, no suspicion. Everyone offered condolences, flowers, and food for the kids. James sent a lengthy, passionate letter about love, grief, and faith. It went viral in the local circles. People appreciated his resilience, his elegance amid sorrow. He was acclaimed as a guy who stood by his wife through the hardest battle. But beneath those words was something horrific. It wasn't until days later that the murmur started. A toxicology study came back indicating traces of cyanide in Angela's blood. The findings didn't make sense. No one could figure out how it got there. The hospital contacted authorities. Slowly, the tale started to unfold. The shipments James purchased, the weird web searches, the timing of Angela's illnesses, it all began linking. When the cops eventually questioned him, his confident facade started to shatter. He denied ignorance, stating someone else must have tampered with her vitamins. But as the evidence piled, his cool exterior deteriorated. The guy who previously appeared immovable now seemed trapped, desperate, and on Smalley. I vividly remember standing outside that hospital, watching the ambulance carry Angela's corpse away. The air was frigid, the sky dreary. Everyone felt she'd merely been a victim of bad luck, a strange sickness no one could explain. But in actuality, she'd been battling something much worse: a spouse who looked her in the eyes, promised her love, and steadily poisoned her with it. When the inquiry started, hardly one wanted to accept what the evidence was pointing toward. How could James Craig, the renowned dentist, the father of 6, the bereaved widower, be capable of anything so cruel? But the further the police investigated, the clearer the image became. The charm, the faith, the stability, it was all a facade. Behind it was a guy living a parallel life, one founded on lies, adultery, and calculation. Detectives began by tracking his internet orders. They identified invoices for potassium cyanide and arsenic, acquired via a company account related to his dentistry office. The chemicals had been transported quietly, classified as laboratory supplies. But there was no valid use for them in his profession. One supplier even got suspicious after witnessing how urgently James needed the delivery. That minor question allowed investigators to construct together a timeline, one that corresponded exactly with Angela's episodes of sickness. Then came the browser history. James' laptop was a blueprint of purpose. He had Google topics like how to make someone sick without getting caught and how much cyanide kills a person. One search even read, "Can strong faith help someone survive poisoning?" It was chilling in its precision. There was no terror, no hesitation, just methodical inquiry. It demonstrated not a moment of wrath, but a pattern of careful preparation. But what actually turned the case was his communication trail. Investigators uncovered emails between James and his mistress, loaded with talk of establishing a new life together, of freedom, and being done with responsibilities. The timing was difficult to ignore. He sent romantic texts to her within hours of Angela's hospitalization. He even promised her once that life would be easier soon. Those statements would eventually become disturbing evidence in court. Angela's brother, very suspicious of James' actions following her murder, started collaborating with the authorities. He recalled how James appeared remarkably calm during the burial, more concerned with practicalities than sadness. When questioned about the chemicals, James said they were for a personal project, a nebulous experiment he couldn't describe. But the falsehood broke apart under forensic analysis. As evidence built up, detectives filed a search warrant for his dental clinic. They discovered traces of the chemicals on tools, sealed containers stored in storage, and paperwork that went straight back to James' email account. Every secret he sought to conceal was waiting to be revealed. The confrontation that followed was strange. James sat across from the police in the questioning room, serene at first, denying everything. But when they showed him the receipts, the search history, and the messages, his expression altered. The confidence drained out of him. For a short time, the polished dentist disappeared, replaced by someone hollow and trapped. I recall when the arrest was made. The word swept across Aurora like wildfire. People were astonished. The guy who had smiled at church, who'd been viewed as the embodiment of moral purity, was now in handcuffs, accused of poisoning his wife. It was more than a crime, it was a violation of trust on every imaginable level. That's when I discovered a painful truth. Evil seldom looks like evil. It hides behind charm, behind erudition, behind the type of assurance that makes others feel comfortable. James Craig had spent years developing that image. Except in the end, the facts took everything away piece by piece, until there was nothing left except the truth, and it was worse than anybody could have imagined. The trial was one of the most emotionally exhausting situations I've ever observed. It wasn't just about demonstrating guilt, it was about untangling the years of falsehoods James Craig had crafted so painstakingly. Every piece of evidence, every witness, seemed like peeling away another layer of the mask he had worn for so long. Sitting in that courtroom, observing him at the defendant's table, it was hard to imagine that this was the same guy who used to grin so confidently at neighborhood meetings. He appeared smaller now, not literally, but in presence. His charisma had evaporated, replaced by a calm, almost sad quietness. The prosecution presented the narrative with clarity. They gave down the timing of Angela's poisoning, the chemical purchases, the damning search history, and the affair that had become the reason. Each detail portrayed an image of cold calculation. When they showed the jury James' online searches phrases like, "How to make poison taste better," and "What does cyanide do to the human body?" there was an audible gasp in the room. It was tough to reconcile such statements with the guy who used to speak of religion and family. Angela's friends and family took the stand, their voices cracking as they detailed her dying days. Her brother, who had been dubious from the start, talked about how Angela trusted James fully, how she protected him even when others had reservations. It was sad. He remarked, she believed love could fix him. She never recognized she was adoring a guy who had already determined to ruin her. The courtroom went silent after that. When the defense spoke, their arguments seemed hollow. They attempted to argue that Angela's death may have been accidental, that the chemicals were for legal dentistry use, and that James' web searches were academic curiosity. But the evidence was too weighty, too consistent. Every effort to alter the tale simply made his culpability clearer. The moment that shattered me occurred when the prosecution read aloud one of James' communications to his mistress. He'd written it only days before Angela died. "Soon we'll be free to live the life we deserve." Hearing those words in court, knowing what they actually meant, made everyone's stomach flip. You could sense the contempt, the incredulity. When the judgment was read guilty of first-degree murder, there was no sound from James. No outcry, no emotion, no apologies. He merely sat there, gazing ahead as if the truth hadn't yet struck him. Angela's family grieved softly, hugging one another. I recall thinking that justice couldn't actually repair what's been broken, it can only identify it. The trial left the community rattled. People questioned how they could have missed the indications, how someone so brilliant, respected, and apparently nice could do something so evil. But that's the lesson the courts forced us to face. Evil doesn't necessarily wear a scowl. Sometimes it grins. It blends in. It earns your trust before it steals everything from you. Watching the decision come down wasn't satisfying, it was disturbing. Angela was gone. Her children would grow up without their mother, and their father would spend the rest of his life behind bars. No one won. The only thing left was truth, and even that seemed heavy. The trial wasn't just about justice for Angela, it was a warning about how manipulation, pride, and deception can taint everything they touch, even the most ordinary lives. In the months following the trial, the town grew silent in a manner that seemed odd. The Craig family's home, once filled with laughter and turmoil, remained empty and silent. Angela's children were left in the care of relatives, and their lives were abruptly separated into two parts. Before and after. Every area of their lives was plagued by memories: her scent, the sound of her voice, the way she used to hum in the kitchen. Those little, ordinary things were the sharpest reminders of what was lost. I visited her sister once, not long after the sentence. She showed me a picture of Angela with her kids, one of those candid ones when everyone's smiling, arms knotted together. She said she kept it framed by the front door as a reminder that genuine love, even if it's gone, doesn't fade. It lingers. You could sense it in the way people still talked about her. Angela had been nice to everyone, never loud, never theatrical, but quietly kind. And it was that quiet kindness that made her passing so terrible. James' name became something people only muttered. For months, his tale flooded the headlines, but finally, the publicity faded. What didn't disappear were the questions. How did no one see it coming? How could a guy who looked so loyal be capable of such coldness? I asked myself those questions more times than I can count. And the toughest thing is learning that evil doesn't necessarily appear bad, it frequently looks familiar. It wears regular clothing, smiles at the neighbors, and picks up the kids from school. Angela's death impacted the way I look at people. It taught me that control may seem like love, that manipulation can lie under compassion, and that naive trust can be hazardous. We grow up thinking that monsters hide in shadows, but occasionally, they live right next to us in the people we believe we know best. Her tale became more than a tragedy, it became a lesson. Friends and neighborhood organizations started hosting discussions about spotting emotional abuse, about paying attention to the silent signs. Isolation, control, secrecy. People began to talk more freely about what love should and shouldn't look like. Angela's legacy transformed into something powerful, a warning wrapped in compassion. I still think about her regularly. Not in the manner she died, but in the way she lived. She was compassionate, resilient, and optimistic till the end. If there's any consolation in her narrative, it's that the truth is ultimately revealed. It took time, but it did. And that fact, as horrible as it was, gave her children something substantial to hang on to, a name for what occurred, and a purpose never to repeat it. In the end, the tale of James and Angela Craig isn't only about murder. It's about how dishonesty flourishes in quiet, and how knowledge may save lives. It reminds me that sometimes the most essential thing we can do for the people we love is to see what they're too terrified to speak, and to never confuse control for caring, or compliance for serenity. Because that's how tragedy begins, quietly, behind closed doors, where love develops into something terrible.